My name is Jenna. At 32, I never expected to be accused of stealing my father's legacy at his memorial. 3 weeks after we scattered his ashes, my cousin Alina stood beside the guest book, smiled for the room, and announced that I had forged a contract to take our family bakery. She waved a printed agreement, claimed co-founder status, and demanded half of everything. People gasped. My mother gripped the pew. My uncle stared at the floor. And I felt the same strange calm you feel when a storm door locks, because I knew something Alina did not. If family drama feels too familiar, like this video, like this moment, tap like, tap subscribe, and stay. Because the way this ended surprised everyone, including me. My father taught me dough before he taught me algebra. Saturday mornings, flour on the radio, cinnamon in the air, patience in his hands. He would say, "Heat is just time telling the truth." We lived above the shop, a narrow brick building with a green awning and a bell that rang like a small laugh. I left for college. I came back with sleeves rolled, recipes tested, and a stubborn plan. We would modernize the bakery without losing the soul. New pastry cases, online orders, a night window for late coffee. My father nodded and said, "Try it. If it fails, we will learn. If it works, we will work harder." Alina was part of my childhood chorus. She was glitter and speed, a different kind of brave. She bounced between ideas, yoga teacher, travel blogger, pop-up jewelry. Always almost, never steady. Our aunt and uncle helped her with rent. Our grandmother handed her folded bills. They said she just needed a break. I wanted that to be true. I kept my distance. I kept my head down. I woke at 4. I proofed dough. I posted photos. The bakery found a rhythm. Customers lined up at dawn for pistachio crullers. We hired 2 baristas. We sponsored the Little League team. My father hung the photo on the wall and cried in the walk-in so no one would see. Then came the night that changed everything. My father stumbled in the kitchen. A stroke, blue lights, quiet halls, a month of rehab. He came home slower, softer, and very clear. He said, "It is time to put the papers in order." We sat with our attorney, a careful woman named Rivera. We formed an LLC. We documented ownership. We notarized signatures. We set clear terms for any family help. We put originals in a fireproof box, copies in a safe deposit drawer, and a digital archive with timestamps. My father said, "Heat is time telling the truth. Paper is truth telling itself." The memorial was meant to be simple. Coffee in paper cups, trays of almond cookies, old customers bringing stories instead of flowers. I shook hands. I hugged. I breathed through the ache. And then Alina tapped the mic. The bell of the front door jingled as late guests slipped in. Alina thanked everyone, spoke about family, spoke about legacy, and then turned to me. She said the bakery was our shared dream. She said she had invested sweat and savings. She said she had a signed agreement naming her co-founder. She held up a page with my name near hers. She said she would be fair and take only half. The room tilted. Whispers rose. My mother whispered no. My uncle coughed into his fist. I felt the old bell ring in my chest, small, steady, and I almost laughed. What Alina did not know sat in a banker box under my desk, and in an email thread with timestamps that never blink, and in the memory of a locksmith who changed the office lock after a missing key. It also sat with Ms. Rivera in a folder labeled contingencies. Months earlier, a wind had already rattled our windows. Alina had asked to join the business. She said she could bring influencers. She said she could bring energy. She said contracts are just paper and family is what matters. I said paper is what protects family. My father listened, thanked her, and said, "First show steady work for 6 months, then we can talk partnership." She did not show up. She posted from a beach. She sold bracelets at a night market. She sent me a late-night text that said, "I can still be a face for the brand." We sent back a polite no. After the memorial announcement, I did not argue. I asked to see the page. I held it to the light. I traced the margin. The language was wrong. The font spacing was off. The signature looked like a copy of a copy. The file name in the footer betrayed a template. I handed it back and thanked her for sharing. I said, "Today is for my father. We can sit down tomorrow with counsel." The room exhaled. Alina grinned like a winner. I poured coffee for Mrs. Daly, who taught me fractions with pie. I hugged Coach Ramos. I stacked cups. I watched the door. Then I locked the office and opened the banker box. Inside sat the operating agreement, the notarized ownership schedule, the buy-sell clause with a line about family members who contribute zero capital and zero labor, the insurance policy, and a signed letter from my father naming me managing member with full decision rights. There was also a printed email from Alina, a request for access to the point of sale, a denial from me, a follow-up with Miss Rivera copied, and a brief reply from Miss Rivera advising us to document all future contact. There was a receipt from the locksmith dated 2 days after a key went missing. There were camera stills of the office door at midnight, a silhouette in a hoodie, a hand on the knob, a failed attempt. I called Miss Rivera. She said, "I am with you. Come in the morning. Bring everything. Do not respond further. Also, Jenna, breathe. Grief makes you porous. Fraud hunts for open doors." I put the box back. I washed the coffee urns. I swept the flour from the baseboards. I stood in the quiet shop my father loved, and I promised him I would keep the heat at the right level. Steady, patient, honest. Morning came with a gray sky. Mrs. Rivera spread documents across a long table. She circled dates. She compared signatures. She showed me the mismatch in the descenders on my name. She said, "This is not your hand." She composed a letter requesting a meeting with Alina and any advisor she wished. In a separate envelope, she included a notice of potential civil and criminal exposure, forgery, attempted conversion, defamation. Miss Rivera said, "We will lead with facts and options. We will not lead with rage." I nodded. I asked for one more thing. I asked for a licensed investigator, not to punish, but to understand the why. Ms. Rivera agreed. She said, "Context is leverage when you want the truth and a better ending." 3 days later, I sat across from a quiet man named Malik. He had eyes that noticed the smallest tilt of a frame. He asked for names, addresses, and habits. He asked for Alina's strengths and blind spots. I said, "She is charming, fast, allergic to routine. She likes to be seen. She hates to be told no." He took notes in small letters. He said, "I will be back soon. Be ready for answers you will not like." I said, "I am ready, or as ready as grief allows." When Malik returned, he placed a thin folder on the table. He said, "Alina is in trouble. Card balances near the limit, a recent denial for a consolidation loan, a notice from her landlord, 2 months behind, a side deal with a promoter who promised brand sponsorships that never arrived. And one more thing, the person who helped her format the contract calls himself a designer. He is also the same person who tried your office door at midnight. He left a trail on a forum asking how to mimic notarization stamps." I closed my eyes. I saw flour in the air like dust in a shaft of light. I saw my father at the bench, patience in his hands. I opened my eyes. I said, "Thank you. Now we bake this slowly. No burning, just heat and time." The meeting was set for Friday at noon. We would sit in the back room of the bakery, 2 chairs, a recorder on the table with consent, water glasses, documents arranged in calm stacks. Ms. Rivera would lead. I would breathe. Alina would choose a path, one with consequences and help, or one with court dates and headlines. I prepped the shop that morning. I iced the orange buns my father loved. I told the team to take lunch early. I wiped the table twice, though it was already clean. The bell rang at noon. Alina stepped in wearing a bright blazer and a smile that skittered at the edges. Behind her walked the designer, chin high, eyes scanning. Ms. Rivera stood, introduced herself, asked for consent to record, pressed the button, and spoke the date and time. Ms. Rivera began with patience, her voice low and even. She said this meeting is to clarify ownership, to correct records, to give everyone a chance to tell the truth before the law must speak for us. Alina nodded with practiced calm. The designer folded his arms, eyes narrow. Mrs. Rivera asked Alina to describe her contribution, dates, amounts, receipts, anything that showed she had invested. Alina said she had ideas. She had promoted the bakery online. She had brought customers through her following. She said my father promised partnership if she helped with branding. She slid her phone forward with a gallery of posts, croissants in sunlight, captions about family legacy, hashtags about hustle. Miss Rivera nodded once. She said creativity has value, but contracts require proof. She asked again about capital or hours worked. Alina's tone sharpened. She said she had cleaned tables. She had run the register when I was sick. She said people saw her there. She turned to the designer for confirmation. He shrugged, said he took the photos but did not count the hours. Mrs. Rivera slid a payroll log across the table. One column blank under Alina's name. She placed a vendor invoice with signatures from staff, but not from her. She let silence fill the space until Alina's hand trembled on the glass. I leaned forward, my heart steady like dough under a cloth. I asked which week she meant when she said she ran the register. I said the point of sale system logs every sign-in, every shift, every refund. She bit her lip. She looked at the designer. He stared at the recorder. Miss Rivera clicked a pen once, the sound like a metronome. She said false statements in a recorded setting can become perjury if repeated in writing, so please be sure. Alina's voice fell to a whisper. Maybe my memory is wrong. Maybe I helped less than I thought. Ms. Rivera opened a folder marked Exhibit B. She placed screenshots from the forum where a user named DesignHero88 had posted a question: how to duplicate a notary stamp without detection. Time-stamped 3 nights before the memorial. She placed the metadata from the forged file showing creation by the same username. She said these came from public sources. She looked at the designer. His jaw tightened. He said nothing. Alina's shoulders sank. I asked quietly, why? She blinked. She said rent. She said panic. She said the promoter vanished and the landlord changed the locks. She said she needed help and thought the bakery owed her for family loyalty. I said family is not currency. She covered her face. The designer exhaled a curse. He said he just helped with layout. He did not know she would use it. Miss Rivera said aiding forgery is still a crime, but she would record his statement if he wished. He shook his head. He stood. He said he wanted no part of this. He left the room. The bell over the door jingled once and went still. Ms. Rivera turned the recorder toward Alina. She said you have 2 paths, public litigation with charges or private restitution with conditions. She explained the first meant exposure, court costs, possible jail. She explained the second meant written confession, financial counseling, supervised repayment through lawful work, and no further contact with internal accounts. Alina wiped her face. She said, please. The second. I cannot go to court. Miss Rivera printed a document from her tablet. She said you will sign that you fabricated the claim, that you forged the document with assistance, that you retract all statements about ownership, and that you accept employment under probation for 6 months. I added softly, and therapy, and rent coverage tied to attendance, and boundaries. No keys, no codes, only daylight shifts. She nodded. She signed with a shaky pen. Miss Rivera notarized the confession properly. Seal pressed firm, heat and time, truth and paper. After they left, I sat in the quiet room, the smell of sugar and citrus heavy. Mrs. Rivera gathered the folders. She said you handled that with grace. I said I just followed the recipe you taught me. Patience, documentation, compassion with edges. She smiled. She said your father would call that a good bake. That night, I called my mother. I said there is more you need to hear. She said come tomorrow. Bring the papers. Bring the calm voice you use in storms. I said I will. I hung up. I locked the shop. I turned off the lights. I stood by the oven as it cooled, the metal ticking like a clock finding rest. Next morning, I drove to my mother's apartment. The smell of lentils and garlic greeted me. My uncle sat at the table, my aunt on the couch clutching a tissue. They already knew something. Gossip travels faster than proof. I placed the folders down. I said Alina confessed. She forged. She was drowning in debt. My mother covered her mouth. Tears slid down her cheeks. My uncle muttered that he had warned her. My aunt asked if jail was coming. I said no. We chose help with consequences. She will work under supervision, pay what she owes, attend therapy. My mother whispered, "Thank you for kindness." I said it is not kindness. It is structure. I spent the afternoon drafting an internal memo for staff. Short, factual, no names, no gossip. The bakery remains family-owned. The schedule holds. All operations stable. Thank you for professionalism. The staff signed acknowledgement. The air grew lighter. Even the ovens seemed to hum softer. The following week, Alina returned for her first probation shift. Apron folded in her hands. She said, "Thank you for letting me try." I said this is not about letting. It is about earning. She nodded. She tied the apron. She stepped behind the counter. The bell rang. The line formed. The day began. The first month felt like walking on glass. Alina arrived on time some mornings, late on others. Her smile stretched too wide, her voice too soft. She flinched when regulars asked where she had been. I gave her the simple tasks: wiping counters, brewing coffee, learning to count change without using the screen. I watched the small tremors in her hands when the bell rang. I said little. I let the rhythm teach her what words could not: heat and time, truth and paper. Customers whispered at first. They always do. They said maybe she was back for forgiveness. Maybe she was back because of pity. Maybe I was foolish to let her near again. I heard them but did not reply. People love stories. They love scandal more. I gave them consistency instead. Open at 7, croissants warm by 7:15, no drama, no raised voices, just butter and patience. Slowly the whispers turned to greetings. Greetings turned to orders, and orders turned to silence. The best kind of respect in a bakery. Every Friday I sent progress notes to Ms. Rivera. Attendance logs, payroll entries, therapy confirmations. She said document everything. Compassion needs receipts. I followed her advice like a recipe. Exact, measured, no shortcuts. Alina hated the routine at first. The checklists, the forms, the weekly counseling reports. She said it made her feel like a prisoner. I said it made her safe. Structure was a wall to lean on, not a cage. She did not believe me then, but time softened her. Routine became comfort, and the comfort became a habit. By the third week, she began asking questions about supply costs, about margins, about why we ordered flour from a specific mill. I explained slowly, showing invoices, showing patterns. She listened, really listened, and I saw a shift in her eyes, the first glimmer of grounded curiosity. I told her numbers do not lie if you treat them with respect. They are like dough. Give them time. Do not rush the rise. She smiled faintly. She said, "Maybe I can learn this." I said, "Maybe you already are." One morning she arrived early, before me. The lights already on. The tables already clean. She had baked a test batch of muffins from a recipe she found in an old notebook of our grandmother's, the tops cracked perfectly, the crumbs soft. She said she wanted to prove she could follow directions. I tasted one, lemon and honey. I nodded. I said it tastes like effort. She laughed for the first time without flinching. Still, not all days were calm. One afternoon, a delivery driver joked about her being the cousin who tried to take the shop. Alina froze, her face blank. Then she dropped a tray. Glass shattered across the floor. Everyone went silent. She knelt to clean it, tears mixing with sugar dust. I crouched beside her. I said accidents happen, but shame does not belong here. She whispered that she did not know how to face people who remember. I said keep showing up. Memory fades slower than guilt, but it fades. She nodded. She swept the shards. She finished the shift. That night I stayed late, fixing the schedule, the hum of the ovens like breathing. I looked at the wall where my father's portrait hung. I whispered, I am trying. I hope this is what you meant by patience. The light above the mixer flickered. I took it as a sign or maybe just old wiring, either way. I smiled. At the end of month 2, Miss Rivera and I met again. She reviewed the logs. She said this is progress, real measurable change. She asked if I felt safe. I said yes. She asked if I trusted Alina yet. I said not trust, maybe respect, maybe the beginning of it. Miss Rivera said that is enough for now. She closed the file. She said you are turning grief into governance. It is rare. It is good. Week by week, Alina's confidence grew. She handled the register without trembling. She greeted customers by name. She started writing the daily menu board with chalk flourishes. She learned to track waste. She found small ways to help. One evening, she stayed after closing to reorganize the dry goods shelves. When I asked why, she said order calms her mind. I smiled. I said, now you sound like me. She laughed again, softer this time. Then came the inspection. The city official arrived unannounced, clipboard in hand, serious face. Alina's old panic flickered. She dropped a towel. I placed a steady hand on her arm. I said, breathe. We have nothing to hide. He walked through the kitchen, checked temperatures, looked under sinks, read logs, all perfect. He nodded. He said this place runs tight. I said thank you. He left. Alina exhaled. She said for a second I thought it would all crumble. I said not anymore, not with this foundation. The next morning, a letter arrived, cream envelope, heavy paper. I recognized my uncle's handwriting. He said our aunt had told the story around town. He said some people pitied us, others called us fools, but he wanted me to know that watching us rebuild had made him rethink how he handled his own children. He said boundaries might be love in disguise. I folded the letter. I kept it in the cash safe, between the ledgers, where I keep proof that patience pays interest. At the end of month 3, I gave Alina her first performance review. We sat in the office, sunlight through the small window. She looked nervous. I said, you have improved. You show consistency. I see humility growing where arrogance lived. She smiled weakly. She said, do you still hate me? I said, hate is heavy. I do not have time to carry it. She nodded. She said, thank you for not giving up on me when I was the reason you should have. I said my father built this bakery on forgiveness wrapped in rules. I am just keeping the recipe alive. Outside, the bell rang. The smell of butter filled the air. Customers laughed. Life moved on. Slowly, steadily, like dough rising unseen in the dark. By month 4, the mornings had their rhythm again. Ovens on at 4, lights warming the front window, Alina unlocking the door exactly at 6:45, her handwriting steady on the chalkboard, daily special, honey lemon muffins, cinnamon knots, the smell of butter layered with trust, not yet whole, but rising. I noticed she had stopped checking her phone every 5 minutes. She no longer flinched when someone said her name. She laughed at small jokes. She hummed when she folded napkins, small human things that mean healing. The bakery itself seemed to breathe easier. The regulars returned with smiles instead of whispers. The delivery drivers brought fresh gossip and left with scones. My mother stopped peeking through the window to check if Alina was behaving. She started bringing soup again on Fridays, setting it on the counter like peace offerings. Alina always thanked her softly. My mother's eyes softened in return. Forgiveness crept in through the steam. Still, cracks appeared, quiet and familiar. One night after closing, the till was short by $20, small enough to ignore, big enough to matter. I checked the log. I checked the footage. It showed Alina counting, distracted, a phone call, a friend laughing on speaker. She forgot to close the drawer. The next customer reached over and paid exact cash, but she forgot to record it. I showed her the clip. She went pale. She said she would repay it twice. I said no, learn instead. Mistakes only rot if you hide them. She nodded, tears in her eyes. The next week her drawer balanced to the cent. At therapy, she learned to track triggers. She started journaling daily. She told me later the therapist had asked her to write one truth she avoids each morning. She said it hurt at first, then it helped. She laughed. She said it is like kneading, painful until the dough relaxes. I said yes, exactly. Pain that leads to structure, structure that leads to strength. Meanwhile, I started something new, a scholarship jar on the counter, called it the bench fund, a nod to the wooden workbench my father built with his hands. The idea was simple. Every quarter we would use tips and donations to sponsor a local teen to learn baking. Customers loved it. They dropped bills, coins, small notes, one said, for the girl who stood up instead of lashing out. It made me pause, because they saw me clearer than I saw myself. Ms. Rivera came by to review the half-year file. She sat at a table with her black coffee, no sugar. She flipped through the binder. Attendance, payroll, therapy confirmations, the confession copy, the apology letter. She smiled. She said, "Jenna, this is what accountability looks like when done right. Most families choose silence or revenge. You chose structure. That is rarer than you think." I said maybe because I had the blueprint from my father. She said then, "Keep teaching it." She closed the binder and wrote one note, "Continue program 6 more months." Later that night, I took a walk along the river, the city lights rippling like caramel on water. I thought about what it means to rebuild trust, not erase the past, but learn to live with it, like a scar that bends but does not break. I passed couples laughing, teenagers taking selfies. I saw Alina's reflection in my mind, apron dusted with flour, smiling shyly at an old man who called her sweetheart. And I felt something loosen in my chest, the first breath that did not ache. Month 5 brought a challenge. Our main supplier raised prices without warning, margins tightened, the staff worried. I held a meeting. I explained costs. I showed numbers. I said we will not cut hours. We will adapt. Alina raised her hand. She suggested a weekend special, small pastries using leftover dough. She called them seconds, priced lower, still beautiful. I hesitated. She said it would reduce waste, attract students. She had done the math. I agreed to try. It worked. Lines formed on Sundays, profits rose, morale lifted. I gave her quiet credit. Her face lit up. She whispered thank you, like it was a fragile secret. By month 6, she had paid back a portion of her debts. Therapy reports glowed with words like consistency and insight. She stopped seeking validation. She started offering it. She noticed when others struggled. She brought tea to tired baristas. She reminded the team to stretch during long shifts. Small kindnesses that once would have felt impossible from her, but now felt natural. Then one afternoon, while cleaning the storeroom, I found the old banker box, the one labeled contingencies. The papers still inside, my father's notes, the original agreement, the copy of the fake will, the photographs. I sat on the floor, dust settling around me. I read his handwriting again, small and neat. His last line, Heat is time telling the truth. Paper is truth telling itself. I realized he had prepared not just for fraud, but for healing. The same documents that had protected me also anchored my forgiveness. Boundaries built the bridge. That evening, I invited Alina to sit with me in the kitchen after closing. 2 mugs of tea, no recorder, no lawyer, just us. I said, "The probation ends next month. You have met every condition. You can leave if you want, or stay as staff. No pity, no leash." Her eyes widened. She said, "I would like to stay, if you want me here." I said, "Stay, but this time by choice, not by consequence." She smiled. She said, "Maybe someday you can teach me to bake croissants from start to finish." I said, "Maybe someday soon, if you keep showing up." We laughed. Quiet, but real. That night I wrote in my journal, "Trust is not built by forgiveness. It is built by repetition. Showing up, counting the drawers, folding the dough, writing the truth every morning until it becomes habit." I closed the notebook. I slept without nightmares for the first time in months. The 7th month began with rain, the kind that slides down the awning and hums against the glass. Mornings darker, streets glistening, customers arriving in coats, dripping umbrellas leaning by the door. The smell of yeast and cinnamon became a small shelter from the storm outside. Alina came in early each day, hair tied back, apron on before the lights were even warm. She said the rain helped her think. I said the rain helps dough rise slower. She smiled. She said then maybe we both rise slower now. The staff had grown to trust her. They no longer watched her hands when she counted change. They asked her advice on fillings. They laughed at her jokes. I stood by the espresso machine one morning, watching them talk like a team again. A family built by work, not blood. I thought about how easily chaos can become a habit. How stability feels strange at first, like silence after years of noise. Mid-month, Miss Rivera called. She said a reporter had reached out. Someone had heard fragments of the story, the memorial, the forgery, the reconciliation. They wanted a human angle, redemption through boundaries. I felt my stomach tighten. I said no interviews. We have our peace. Let us keep it. Miss Rivera agreed. She said silence is strength when noise would only reopen scars. But the world has ears. Whispers moved through the neighborhood, half-truths mixing with memories. A customer asked Alina if she really forged a contract. She froze. She nodded once. She said yes. I made mistakes. I am making amends. Then she served his coffee and went back to work. Later she told me, I decided I will not hide behind silence. Truth is lighter when carried openly. I said that is courage. She said no, it is necessity. If I pretend, the lie grows again. I smiled, because she had understood what it took me years to learn. The bench fund had grown, the jar heavy with coins, folded bills, small notes that said, for the next baker, for second chances, for the girl who learned boundaries, for the cousin who stayed. I counted it one night, $2,600, enough to sponsor 2 apprentices. I called the community center. I told them we were ready. They sent 2 teenagers, shy, curious, smelling faintly of bus rides and rain. Maya and Rafi, brother and sister, 15 and 17. They wanted to learn to bake to help their mother. Alina volunteered to train them. She said it would help her practice patience. I agreed, and for the first time, I trusted her with someone else's learning. The first week with the apprentices was chaos, flour everywhere, burnt rolls, laughter and tears. Alina lost her temper once, then caught herself. She apologized to them. She said mistakes are part of the recipe. Maya said, it is okay. We burn things at home too. Rafi laughed. I stood by the door, watching, my chest warm. My father would have loved this noise. Young hands learning to knead, to fold, to wait, to believe. At home that night, I sat by the window, the rain still steady. I thought about grief, how it moves, Not like a wave, but like weather. Changing, returning. Sometimes gentle, sometimes fierce. I missed my father, but his lessons were alive in everything around me, in the smell of sugar, in the sound of laughter, in the quiet accountability that filled the shop. One afternoon, Alina's therapist called me with her consent. She said, "I wanted to thank you. Your structure has done what years of guilt could not. It has given her purpose." I said, "Structure is just love with walls." The therapist laughed softly. She said, "Then keep building walls that have doors, not prisons." I said, "That is the goal." The 8th month brought sunlight back, the sky clear, the air warm. We opened the windows in the kitchen, the scent of baking drifting into the street. New faces came in, college students, tourists, locals returning. The bakery buzzed again. One morning, a child pointed at the portrait of my father on the wall and asked who he was. Alina bent down and said, "He was the man who taught us that patience is love you can taste." The child nodded solemnly, as if understanding something too big for words. Then came the festival, the annual street fair. Food stalls lining the block, live music, banners fluttering, the bakery booth gleaming under the banner, the Bench Fund Bakehouse. Our staff wore matching aprons, embroidered with small white letters, heat and time, truth and paper. Alina stood beside me at the booth, confident, calm. She greeted customers, explained the scholarship jar, told our story without shame, not as scandal, but as recovery. People listened, they nodded, they bought pastries, they donated, the jar overflowed. That evening, as we closed, Alina handed me a small envelope. She said it was from her. I opened it. Inside was a letter and a check, her first personal repayment for the legal fees I had covered. She wrote, "This is for the damage I caused, not just to your finances, but to your peace. I cannot repay the latter, but I can start with the former." I folded the letter. I said thank you, but I will use this for the next apprentice. She smiled. She said then that is repayment enough. Later, we sat on the curb outside the bakery, lights glowing soft, the street quiet after the fair. She said, "Do you ever miss how things were before?" I said no, because before I did not know how strong boundaries could be. She said, "I used to think forgiveness meant forgetting. Now I think it means remembering differently." I nodded. I said yes, remembering without reopening the wound. She looked up at the night sky. She whispered, "Thank you for giving me another life." I said, "Thank you for finally living it right." The bell above the door jingled once more as the wind passed. The shop smelled like sugar and rain, like endings and beginnings mixed together. The 12th month came with light so clear it felt like forgiveness. Spring air drifting through the doorway, the awning newly washed, the windows polished until they caught the morning sun. Everything inside glowed a softer gold. The ovens hummed low, steady, honest. Alina arrived early carrying fresh flowers. She said they were for my father. She placed them under his portrait. She whispered good morning and wiped her eyes. I stood behind her and said, "He would be proud." She nodded. She said, "Maybe now I can believe that." The scholarship program grew faster than we imagined. Maya and Rafi finished their training. They baked their first batch alone, perfect crusts, clean edges. They brought their mother to taste them, she cried. The jar filled again before noon. Customers clapped when I told them the first 2 apprentices had finished. Alina stood beside me, applause washing over both of us, not as redemption, but as proof that time, given enough patience, can turn ruin into rhythm. Later that week, Miss Rivera stopped by for the last review. She carried a new folder, thinner than the old ones. She said, "This is closure." She signed the end of probation. She said, "The bakery is fully yours, legally clean, emotionally mended." She looked around. She smiled. She said, "Jenna, your father's legacy is no longer a building, it's a process." I said, "A recipe." She laughed. "Yes, a recipe that teaches people how to start again." That night, I hosted a dinner for the team. Candles on the counter, soup from my mother, bread from the morning bake, laughter echoing off the tiled walls. Alina sat between the apprentices. They showed her pictures of the new bakery club they were starting at school. She promised to visit. My mother poured tea. My uncle fixed a loose hinge on the door. The shop smelled like sugar and forgiveness, like something rebuilt on truth rather than illusion. When everyone left, I locked the door and sat by the window, the city quiet, only the hum of the cooler behind me. I opened my father's last notebook, the one he kept for ideas. The final page said, "When you mix patience with honesty, you never burn the bread, you only learn the right heat." I closed the book. I said aloud, "Thank you for teaching me even from silence." 1 year to the day after his memorial, we held a small gathering, no speeches, just people who had stood through the storm. Ms. Rivera, Malik, the staff, the apprentices, my mother, even the landlord who used to glare about deliveries. Alina stood beside me at the counter. We cut a single cake, almond and orange. She said, "The first thing you ever taught me was to measure." I said, "And the last thing you taught me was to trust measurement." We laughed quietly, the kind of laugh that feels earned. As the evening ended, I watched Alina walk out with her coat over her arm, head high, steps steady, no longer the cousin who chased shortcuts, but the woman who had learned to stay. She turned at the corner, waved once. I waved back. No words, just understanding, closure, written in motion. Now when I tell this story, I do not call it betrayal, I call it calibration. The moment the scales balanced again. The bakery still stands, the bell still rings, the jar still fills, and every morning I whisper the same 3 truths to myself. Heat is time telling the truth, paper is truth telling itself, love is the patience to check both before serving. If you have ever faced a fracture inside your own family, if someone you trusted turned chaos into currency, remember this. Boundaries are love with walls. Documentation is kindness wearing armor. Forgiveness is not softness. It is architecture, built one small act at a time. I hope you build something that holds. Have you ever rebuilt trust after betrayal? What tools did you use? Share below, like, subscribe. And remember, healing is not quick bread, it is sourdough, slow, alive, rising while you sleep, ready when you are.